Very warm greetings and welcome to today's edition of the African Leadership Group, the Nigerian or African Leadership Series, depending on where you are. I'm giving you warm greetings from Sun City in South Africa, where I've come to spend a little bit of time with the children and just to unbuckle and unwind at this point in time. So, being in South Africa, we have decided that our guest today will be from the local area. Although he's a Zimbabwean by birth and origin, he has spent and lived more in South Africa in the last few years. He's the founder of the Tribe Africa Advisory Group, and which is a boutique business development advisory firm that works with private and public organizations in enhancing the capacity of doing business successfully on the African continent. Drawing from his seasoned experience of being an executive that led strategic business development company initiatives in Africa in over 20 countries, over 20 years. The company has always leveraged off its vast network of strategic partners, and associates that have been successful in navigating the African business terrain. Our guest today is Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. I hope I got the pronunciation right, Hwindingwi. Dr. Rutendo, CEO and founder of the Tribe Africa Advisory. He's been on various committees, the British Chamber of Commerce in Southern Africa, Vice Chairman of Trade and Investment Forum, and so on and so forth. He has a PhD in business strategy from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, MSc in strategic management, University of Derby in the UK, and he has various diplomas. Published a few books, Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, and Reflections on the Son of the Soil, a collection of African proverbs. Dr. Rutendo, you are most welcome. And Sisa Bawana, or whatever the greeting is in South Africa, Sinaboga, yeah, great to see you. And thank you for coming. We're going to be talking today on making Africa globally competitive, making Africa globally competitive. And I think this is a good area to birth in these days where Donald Trump is lifting all sorts of sanctions on all sorts of places and generally making life difficult for the simple average person. Okay, and it's a bit of a worry for us as to what the African reaction is going to be and how Africa is really going to cope with the way the world is going. China has started to make itself the manufacturing hub of the world. Europe is still battling with its technology and making things work efficiently using best cost. America, whether they like it or not, is beginning to dwindle. Its factories are shutting down, and most of the things are being brought from outside of America, although they still lead to some extent in some aspects of cutting-edge technology. India is picking up its boots, trying to find its area of comparative advantage and becoming a very, very loud and strong voice in the world, and so on and so forth. Singapore continues to lead in financial excellence, and Japan has never stopped for one moment to lend itself to manufacturing and technological development. Israel, in spite of its troubles, is still putting its weight in agriculture and technology. What is Africa doing? Maybe that's where we should start. Over to you, Doctor.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
All right. Pastor, I hope I can pronounce this properly. Itua Igahodalo.
I forgive you, but I accept.
I need to eat a bit more jollof rice. I've not been taking my pounded yam and my jollof rice enough, because if I'd been eating the right load, I would have been coming up. But I don't know if Ikasi, I know in the morning you say Karo. I'm sure in the evening you say Kasi. I hope I've got it right. But I think you're going to be forgiving me a lot today.
Kason means good afternoon. I think we're nearer the evening now.
Is it? Okay. In an exam, I would have got 5 out of 10. But a big thank you,
so it's Ekurole now.
Ekurelena.
Ekurole.
Ekurele. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pastor. But a big thank you for having me. And thank you also to my brother Fikayo, who connected us. And also I see another good colleague of mine, Emmanuel ASEAN, who's also logged on. He used to be a director at EY in South Africa, went back to Nigeria and is back. And I saw him log on, but he's a good friend of mine also, Fikayo. But I think just to start off the conversation, Pastor, if it's okay with you, there are just a few slides. Literally will take me 15 minutes just to set the scene, because I think the conversation of making Africa competitive globally is a broad one, but there were 1 or 2 nuggets. So if it's okay with you, I'll just load them. And then it's not a death by PowerPoint. There are 2 areas I want to set in. And then from there, if you give me that 10 to 15 minutes, then we can have a robust conversation. Is that okay?
Okay, but make it nearer 10 so that we can have it more conversational, if you don't mind.
Definitely. Now, don't worry, not a problem at all. I'm just going to, and I'll ask you to keep me, once I start, keep me honest with time, so you can time me, so we stick to that. I'm just finding where I can load I'm trying to look. Oh, there we go. Share. There we go. Share. Screen. There we go.
You can share.
And then I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint slide on. Can you see my slide, sir?
Yes. Yeah.
There we go. Can you
Go
see
ahead.
it? Okay, there. All right, perfect. There we go. So, okay, this is the topic. You've introduced me well. Just my background, I've worked with a number of multinationals doing business in Africa, both in the private and the public sector. So that's just a bit of context. And I've actually also opened up offices in Nigeria and Kenya and drawing my experience from there. But I wanted to highlight to you my greatest qualification. I know you talked my qualification about my experience, Pastor, but my greatest qualification, the one that's most important and relevant to this discussion, is that I'm a Chelsea supporter. So I need to outline that, because I think that's more important than anything else.
Now, this is where the quarrel starts. Oh my God. Please, why did you put me here with this man? What happened to Liverpool? No.
Well, you know, Christmas comes once every 100 years for Liverpool. But anyway, at least the discussion today is not about talking about that.
We'll meet on this.
I've published 2 books, Rumble in the Jungle, which was endorsed by 10 multinational CEOs about doing business in Africa, and also about my second book's about a collection of 55 African proverbs. And I'll get those across to you as well.
That'll be nice.
Complimentary packs.
Are you a Muhammad Ali fan also? Rumble in the Jungle.
Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, yes. And both are late, by the way. Bear in mind, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman died 2 weeks ago. So 2 great stories. And I've also got a whole framework around that that's impacted in that book. But really, the purpose of today is just to set the scene. And really, it's just to set the scene. I know you've got many learned people around the table, but the conversation of taking Africa globally. And there's a lot of insight and focus, but today I want to just focus on 2 key aspects that are around that, and it'll be around skills and trade. That's what I was zoning on. And really my intention is just to highlight 2 areas that I believe Africa can make an impact globally. At the same time, fixing our problems, but how to make us competitive globally. And sometimes we tend to forget about that in the dilemmas that we're in. So just to set the scene, just some key stats about Africa, and I call this the Africa conundrum in terms of, you know, people look at the problem in Africa, other people see it as opportunity. I'll talk about 5 key points and then move on to the other 2 key areas that I want to highlight. Unemployment is a big problem. The average unemployment in Africa is 32% if you look at the big boys, being South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Algeria, and Egypt. But although unemployment is a problem, FDI investment and the growth of jobs is still significant. So last year, $164 billion of FDI was invested by leading countries in Africa and in first world countries, and they created 205,000 jobs. The other one is infrastructure. We know with FCFTA, it's a big challenge. We fall short every year about $100 billion in terms of funding, but infrastructure growth and investment, again, by foreign investors onto the continent is significant, and you can see the number there of 62 billion over the last year. Climate change, we know that Africa is prone to climate change. We've seen whether it's the coastal countries, whether it's dry weather, whether it's heat. But having said that, one of the fastest growing areas of, I'm seeing my slide. Oh, there we go. My apologies. My screen was a bit blurred. Climate change, 61 billion in clean tech was invested in the country over the last 10 years. So it's just highlighting again, although we've got a problem, we've got big traction with regards to solving the problem through this kind of investments. Our fiscal debt ratio is one of the highest in the world, 63.5% on average across Africa. And averages, again, distort things, but just to get a feel. But having said that, by 2025, from 2005, industrialization would have grown by 3.6%. And this is key, especially when you talk about FCFTA and where we are going. And then the last one, coup d'etats. We know in the Sahel region, in Nigeria, you're close to that, is a big problem. Since 1950, there have been 492 coup d'etats in Africa, in the world. 220 of them have been in Africa alone, and 109 of them have been successful. So we have that challenge of political instability. But the hope for me is that 40% of the world's youth by 2050 will be in Africa. So we'll have capable resources and capability that we can use to position the rest of the world. So this is just in terms of setting the scene past. I'm just giving context in terms of the good and the bad. And it's important because as I wrap up now, as I said, I'm just sowing seed for us to unpack. It's a lot of statistic, but this is the reality of Africa and where we are. So there are two, in terms of taking Africa globally and be competitive, there are two areas I want to talk about. And in short, powerful: skills and trade. And those, you can talk about energy, you can talk about other areas. We don't have a whole period. As you said, we've got 10 minutes and we want to make it a robust conversation. So let me start off with skills and why I believe Africa is positioned to be competitive globally, not just in terms of fixing our problems, but globally. The first thing, just to highlight a dilemma, and this is from the UN reports. On average, there are over 60 million young Africans who are facing unemployment annually. At least 11 million young people join the African labor market each year. So you can see the growing problem, and this is on average per year. Africa only generates about 3.7 million jobs annually. And a big chunk of the people who get the jobs are in the SME sector. So what it just highlights here is that we've got an unemployment problem. We've got a huge population of young people, but the reality is there are not enough jobs in the African geographical space to absorb them. So the question is, we've got all this skill, we've got a lot of learned people, what can we do with them? Now, this is where the opportunity rises, is that Korn Ferry did a brilliant report, and they said by 2030, we can expect a global talent deficit of 85.2 million. So in other words, they're saying that although there's unemployment problems in Africa, globally, there's an underemployment problem that is there. So by 2030, they expect about 85.2 million shortage of workers. And this global skills shortage could translate to about 8.5 trillion revenue in GDP. So to cut a long story short, if we've got an overpopulation of young people who are unemployed, there's opportunity, and not in terms of sending to the diaspora, but providing those skills using technology globally. So that's one opportunity of positioning African young people and old people into providing a global solution. And this graph just shows you the levels of deficit. You can see the orange means significant deficit, 6 to 12 million in terms of shortage of skills people. You can see, you go to China, it's Asia, you can see the gaps there. And you can see Africa doesn't, because we've got an unemployment problem, but the rest of the world have a shortage of skills. So already there's an opportunity there. So one of the area that's there, and I'm just going to whisk through this, is that one of the areas of skills, and it's already up in the African continent, is we've been seen as an offshore destination. In other words, we're providing services globally. Why? Because we've got a young population, we've got affordable human capital, we are multilingual, we meet SDG goals when people invest in us in different time zones. And just to give you some extra statistic, Africa is becoming a leading BPO destination, talking about skills again. And in 2022 and 2023, we brought in about $2.85 billion of export revenue and created 1.2 million jobs by providing offshore services in Africa to the rest of the world. And this can grow, bearing in mind that Korn Ferry report. So this is just one big one that I want to land on in terms of skills that we can use and equip the rest of the world and bring in revenue onto the continent. So that's the first one, Pastor. I'm going to the second one, and then I'll close the door. How much time have I got left, Pastor, into my 10 minutes?
Go ahead, we're enjoying you.
So trade, and this one is very relative to what is happening. So the way I've unpacked trade in terms of how we position ourselves, there are three regions that I've brought into play. Africa, and then you cannot talk about the global trade dynamics without forgetting America and China. And that's the way I've unpacked it. Okay, so we know this man has come on board and this caused problems. The song is playing is Return of the Mac. So from a trade perspective, I'll start off with this graph. The graph that you're seeing in simplicity, you don't have to be an economist, is just showing you the trade trends that are between China and the US. And I'll explain how this relates to Africa. So this is point number one. So you can see from 2000, the trade in China, that the combined trade that China had and the US was 125 billion. So you can see that in the year 2000, China had a trade of about 103 billion with the US, and the US had 22 billion. You can see over the years, if you get to 2023, you can see the trade value that China was doing with the US was 448 billion, and the US was 195 billion. And in 2018, when Donald Trump came in, you can see there's a bit of a blip. There was a trade dip from China, which is kind of happening now because of the tariffs. But to cut a long story short, the combined trade between China and the US per annum is about $636 billion US. Just to give you context, Pastor, that is the equivalent GDP on average. It's actually more on average of either South Africa or Nigeria or Ethiopia. So in other words, what China trades with the US per annum is bigger than what the average GDP of one of the biggest of the big four countries in Africa. Anyway, this is just to give context. So number one, you can see the quantum. Obviously, Donald Trump, as a capitalist, wants those graphs to swap. He wants China to be importing more from the US than vice versa. Will he achieve it? If this has taken 23 years to get there, I don't think it'll happen overnight. But anyway, that's the first point. Right. We go to the second point. I've talked about the trade that China is doing with the US. What are the main things that they're trading between the two of them? And bear in mind, these are the two biggest economies, right? If you look at the total US imports from China, to total US imports from China to the US, you can see it's mainly computers, cell phones, and clothes. And we've seen with Temu, Shemu, that confirms that. So the main things coming from China to the US are those manufactured items, you know, the Apple story, et cetera, right? What is China exporting from the US? You can see again, if you look at Comtrade reports, it's commercial aircrafts, automobiles. The only exception, there's soybeans. But what is the biggest, most combining factor in all of this, Pastor? The biggest, most combining factor, these are manufactured goods. The two biggest economies that are trading the equivalent of the biggest country in Africa in terms of GDP value is manufactured goods. So now, this is where Africa steps in. The question is, if these biggest economies in the world are trading manufactured goods, where are they getting the raw materials from? This is where we come in. And this is where we have to think in terms of the competitiveness of Africa. So again, just to show the trade graphs, if you look in 2000 to 2023 trend, in 2024 hasn't changed much. You can see that what China and Africa has been trading and what USA and Africa has been trading. So if you follow the red line, you can see that in 2000, Africa's trade value with China was about $11.7 billion. You can see how it's increased in 2023 to 282 billion. You can see for the US, it was about 29 billion. It doesn't grow much. It's around about 72 billion with Africa. The point here is that these two guys, as much as they're fighting with each other, they are transacting about $600 billion amongst themselves, with a large chunk of the raw materials coming from Africa. So the opportunity for Africa is to say, you guys, you can fight amongst yourselves. How do we increase the value of what we're selling to you and position ourselves? That's why the argument of industrialization, of AFCFTA is absolutely crucial, because when you look at the numbers, we're at the bottom line of the value proposition in terms of what we offer these guys. So as I come to the end, my last two slides, Pastor, then we'll have a discussion. This was an extract from a newspaper when Biden was still in president. Actually, when Trump 1.0 was existing, he said, in Africa, Trump saw hearts, Biden sees opportunity to curb President Xi's growing influence. I sit on the board for the British Chamber and the American Chamber, and I can tell you the mentality of Trump hasn't changed since that time. So the case in point here, it's really up to us as Africa to see our value and fight ourselves up the ladder. And then my last slide, I like this one. It's another newspaper article. And this was from Trump 1.0, but it still applies today. Champagne corks will pop in Beijing and Moscow if USA fails to renew AGOA trade. So in other words, is that people are actually fearful of AGOA leaving for Africa, but Africa should realize the value it plays in the global chain of economics and should say, how do we position ourselves to be competitive? And two people who I admire, who are making sterling efforts in making this happen, obviously, Dr. Adeshina, who's now stepping down as the chair president of AFDB, and Amkele with regards to FCFTA. Both these gentlemen of excellence can make a huge impact if the mindset in terms of everything else with Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And in order to achieve this, we have to work as Africans together. There's this popular Malawian proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And these are my contact details for later on, point of reflection. Pastor, with that, I just tried to make it short, hopefully sweet, but the idea was really to set the scene with regards to the value proposition in terms of how to make Africa competitive globally. And I think with that, I can take a pause and have the engaging conversation with you. I'm going to disconnect my sharing slide, so at least I can able to see the screen. But again, thank you for having me, and I hope that set the scene for our conversation.
Thank you very, very much, Rutendo, and thank you for all that information and all the statistics. It seems as though China is somehow overtaking the US in terms of dominance in trade and is doing bigger business, both between itself and the US and itself and other parts of the world. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the trade surplus is on China. So remember, the trade on average about $600 billion between the two of them, but the surplus is on China. So China is exporting more to the US. It's about 80%. So of that 400 billion is I'm just using arbitrary terms, is profit to China. So Donald Trump is a capitalist. Think of it, he's not an economist. He's not he's a capitalist. So he's here saying, look, I'm buying more from this supplier. I want to sell it. I want him to buy more from me. And he wants to reverse the tables. But the problem with that is that 400 billion surplus is accumulated over the last 20 years. So to change it overnight through manufacturing plants, through tariffs, is not an easy thing. And the reality is that theoretically it's impossible. But I think where my argument is, Pastor, is that sometimes we get caught up in that war, but we should say to ourselves, irrespective of who's going to be making profit between those two, the raw materials they are using are from us. We should be saying, how can we sell them at a higher cost, thinking as business people, as capitalists, so that we're making a profit? Because at the moment, we're relying a small line item of cost in the bigger picture, if that makes sense.
Okay, so what is stopping Africa from further developing its raw materials, adding value to that raw material, and making the most out of it. I see what happened in Niger recently between that country and France over one of the raw materials that they use in cell phone manufacture and also in the military industry and things like that, cobalt or something. I'm not quite sure. I remember. So what really is stopping Africa from developing its raw materials? That's in fact why the colonialists Africa in the first place.
So I don't think we're stopped. I think, well, African leaders, because I believe there's a generation of African leaders that is there now that actually realized this a long time ago. And I'm going back to Kwame Nkrumah. I'm going back to even the days before Obasanjo. I'm going back to, the frontline leaders. They actually realize, you go back to the Burkina Faso gentlemen, you go back to all of those guys. They realized then, in terms of the dominance of the raw material, you go back to DRC and how the King Leopold split up the continent. There was always a reality that we can produce more. So that's why for me, and I'll show you with some more stats, FCFTA in the drive for industrialization, because remember, for us to to make more money of beneficiation is by selling processed goods, so industrialization. So in other words, we're saying to the guys, instead of us selling you the raw wood or trees that have been cut down, we are going to process them and convert them into paper and sell you the paper, which is more expensive. So that's why the drive of FCFTA industrialization. And if you looked at one of my statistics, I showed how industrialization from 2005 to 2025 has grown by 3.6%. Because the reality that is there is that right now Africa's GDP is 3.1 trillion. Our combined GDP is 3.1 trillion. America's GDP by itself is 30 trillion. So America is 10 times the size of African GDP. Now that might make us look small, but the reality is there is that's why it's so more important that when we make economic decision, we have to do it combined as a continent. It's not enough for us to do it individually, because if South Africa wants to stand by itself, Nigeria wants to stand by itself. So coming back to that is that FCFTA, industrialization, the African Union, those drives are key. So we need to go as a united bloc, and EU has done this very well. The EU has been successful because they realize individually don't have power, but when we're combined, that's fine. So countries like Africa, when they go to China, they must go there and say, let us negotiate stronger trade deals to the benefit of Africa as a combined bloc. When they go to the US, they must do it combined. Because once we are divided, we lose our power. Because individually, we're already small. Combined, we're already small. But when you look at your Singapores and the Koreans, they've been able to navigate through that because they've worked together as the Asian blocks, as the EU blocks, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be my line of thought with regards to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a very brilliant line of thought. And I wish you could deepen it a bit further. You did say something very significant, and that Africa must go to the market together. But you know that all the Europeans have tried to do since colonization is to divide Africa. The first thing they did was to divide us out based on natural lines. And then they imposed on us their culture, their language, their culture, their attitude. So these days, you find Francophone Africa almost at loggerheads with Anglophone Africa and so on and so forth in terms of attitude to life and so on and so forth. That's number one. Number two, leaders like Nkrumah, even more recently Muammar Gaddafi, and people like that, who are trying to bring together an African Union, were also somehow embarrassed out of power, or coups were done against them, and all sorts of crimes where they were accused. I still don't understand how Africa can allow America to come to Africa and kill Gaddafi and just trumped up charges against him or whatever it was. And America and Britain have done this a lot, and France has done quite a lot to destabilize a lot of the Francophone nations and make them really dependent on France. You mentioned coups, I think, and you said 220 of those coups were done in Africa. They were deliberate. They were not accidents. a lot of them had Western influence or Western encouragement or even Western funding. So putting all this in a bucket, what are your thoughts, and how do we?
Look, the politics, remember the knife cuts both ways, because even during that time, even Africans themselves have been split and we've turned on each other, which is sad, but that happens when there's those things happen. But just to give you my thoughts, and again, bear in mind, these are my thoughts, not official thoughts, but let's go to the King Leopold, because I've analyzed that whole story of King Leopold with regards to how he had that big meeting in Belgium to split up Africa. And I was trying to say to myself, initially, I just said, okay, this guy did this thing. Was it out of the kindness of his heart? And when I say kindness of his heart, in terms of benefiting his fellow European colleagues, then I realized something, and this is a point of reflection. I believe he came to DRC, and we know DRC as a geographical country is very big. And he realized that there's so much wealth and there's so much potential in this country. But he also realized that although DRC was big, Africa was bigger. And I believe that he actually realized that, how do I protect this asset called Zaire? Okay, in those days, it wasn't DRC, it was Zaire. Because he knew that DRC is landlocked and you've got all this wealth. So the only way you can protect this asset that he found was to ensure that his neighboring countries protected him. So I'm thinking as a capitalist, bear with me, Pastor. I'm thinking as an African capitalist, or as one of your famous authors in Nigeria who wrote Capitalist Nigger. I've forgotten his name, but I enjoyed that book, but he's there on my bookshelf. So he probably said, let me get people around me to ensure that I look after my asset. So he went and he had this big party in Belgium and made sure Congo, Brazzaville, he got some French guys. He made sure the English covered Zambia. He made sure the English and the French covered Rwanda. He made sure that Egypt, etc., etc. So my point is, he was actually smart in doing that. But I'll come back to your point in terms of how do we avoid it. But I think the reality is that we are, capitalism is all, you look at the slave trade. The slave trade was a source of cheap labor to the first world. That's what it was, because the first world realized industrialization earlier than us, and you had all this cheap labor, which came to the equivalent of 12 million Black people went across. It was atrocious, etc., etc. But it was a key factor in driving industrialization in the first world. So that's the history. And unfortunately, because of that, the scars are there. We have to look forward. What is the solution in terms of going forward? Economically, we know where we stand and what we have. But I believe that it is totally impossible to get all 54 countries in Africa united in one voice to make a decision. I believe it's totally impossible. The history, the cultural differences, the geographical differences, the wealth differences are too big. But if you get leaders, and that's why the role of leaders is absolutely critical. If you get leaders economically that have got power and influence, so you have to speak Nigeria because of the political and economic clout that you've got. You have to speak South Africa. You have to speak Ethiopia. North Africa, you have to speak Egypt, your Tunisians. You get 7 or 8 of them, and you get them around the table, and you say, guys, you lead in terms of the right landscape, the right blueprint in terms of industrialization, in terms of skills development, in terms of skilling doctors, etc., etc. If you guys lead, the others will follow. You might not get all 54, but even if you get 80%, if you look at FCFTA, how it came into effect, you had a person like Kagame, who has a small country, but was able to influence the big boys and see where you are. So I think what I'm trying to, and I'll end on this in terms of the point, is because I don't want to be talking too much, is that you need to have an element of leadership that is backed by economic power in Africa that can lead others. And you need to get a critical mass, just enough to create a catalyst movement. And for me, that's why I get excited with FCFTA, because it's not where we want it to be, but the way it's galvanized the continent in terms of saying, guys, there is one thing that we can do. Right now, you've got 55 signatories on the FCFTA, 54, sorry, because Western Sahara, we know our brothers from another mother are still politically arguing with Morocco. But you've got 54 countries that have signed it. And it's very rare to get, the only time such kind of a unity happened was when we had the Africa Union set up, or AU, for the sake of, and remember that time it was anti-apartheid. So I think we're moving in the right direction. It's slow, it's cumbersome, but I'm excited when I see things like the AFCFTA and what it's doing, what it means, and what it can achieve if it's coupled with the right support.
You see, this is where the rubber hits the road, my brother. And this is what the challenge is. You know, Africa simply has not been blessed, let me use that word out of my pastoral heart, to have leaders who can take the mantle, especially in places like Nigeria.
No. You know the one.
Egypt a bit better. Ghana, it is not been quite there. And South Africa has been struggling with leadership. A lot of them have been very, very insular, looking into themselves. Some have been extremely corrupt. And very few have been either nationalistic nor Afrocentric in their thinking. To be honest, the last person was Gaddafi, who had that look. Now, I think Traore or so, the young man in Burkina Faso, seems to be making the noises and things like that. And already there are threats to his life. How do we, the ordinary Africans, yourself and myself, who tend to understand these issues and this problem, how can we really influence either the leadership or the followership in Africa to tell them that this is the direction to go? What do we do? We seem to be orphans and incapable at this stage, if you ask me.
So I always look at the glass half full. And you, Pastor, you ask a lot of hard questions. So I'm glad for my A-levels I wasn't in your class because I would have failed because you're a tough teacher.
No comment. I forgive you again.
So in terms of, okay, let me give you an example of South Africa because I'm here. All right. So and bear in mind, I agree with you. We've got challenges, but right now, if you were to ask anybody, what is the perfect blueprint of democracy? If you go to a country and you say this country's got a perfect blueprint of democracy, 10 years ago you probably would have said America. Right now, you can't say that. If you want to go to China, it's not a democracy. So I think even what we call the role model of democracy, yes, from an economic perspective, we can say you've got countries like the Middle East, your Dubais that are doing well, and ultimately that's a reflection, but it's a debatable. But let me not run away from the problem. Let me give you based on what I think. Let's look at South Africa. South Africa, with its history of apartheid, etc., has come through elections. Should it be where it should be in terms of being a better economy? No, it's not. It's got 1%, plus or minus 1% growth economically from a GDP perspective. But one thing about South Africa, and remember I come from Zimbabwe, where, and you know the history of Zimbabwe, we had Robert Mugabe, he was a great leader. I went to the same school he went to. Obviously, I'm not his age. And it was such a prestigious thing to go to the same school he went to as a Catholic mission school. Where Zimbabwe is now is not a reflection where it should be. Coming back to South Africa, right now, we've got a government of national unity. I've talked about there have been 50 coup d'etats in the world since 1950. 220 of them have happened in Africa. 109 of them have been successful. But irrespective of what we think or not, South Africa has never been through a coup d'etat. This time last year, South Africa was on the tenterhooks of the political situation going haywire. People even thought that because we're going to go through the elections with Jacob Zuma going against Ramaphosa, and obviously we've got the DA with the EFF, we were cauldron of what people depicted to be a political mayhem. Nobody ever thought that a government of national unity that has stabilized the country to such a point that the country is still operating. It's not perfect. There's arguments, but the country is ticking. There was no Harvard professor. There was no London Business School professor. There was no brilliant genius sitting in the first world country who forecasted the result that is leading the country right now. And right now we're stable. I'm just talking about South Africa. So what am I trying to say to this is that Ramaphosa, who's the current president of South Africa, is not perfect. But we cannot deny in terms of the success story of South Africa where it is now. So I think I'm just using South Africa as an example. My point is that I think sometimes we end up focusing on the negative at the expense of the positive. You look at a country like Botswana, which is next door. They've had one party that has been ruling the country for the last 50 years. And by surprise, without a political fight, without a conflict, without a civil war, that leadership has changed and has been smooth. So I'm just talking about these as glimpses. You talk about the Sahel region with President Traoré, who's taken over. You see the dynamics there. Look, I'm always nervous when a coup d'etat takes over a country because I say give it a bit more time. But if I hear all the positive stories that are coming out of that in terms of how the country is settling, I know Nigeria has gone through its challenges, but whether you like it or not, Nigeria is one of the biggest powerhouses on the African continent. So I think what I'm trying to highlight is that I don't have the exact solution in terms of how do you fix it, but I'm saying when I look at the positives, you go to Egypt, you go to Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia in terms of what he's done, in terms of now position Ethiopia to be a global powerhouse, and the initiatives and remember when I started the presentation, I showed you the positive stories of investment. So again, not wanting to talk too much, but I think the point is, if you look at those stories, the positive stories coming out of Africa, what has come up, what has happened, you realize that we've got the ingredients. We need to amplify them and use that to say, how do we get everybody else following through? So that'll be my concocted answer, but I'm more optimistic, and that's why I call myself an African realist. I'm more optimistic, but accepting that there are challenges that are negative on the continent, but the hope is there, and we have done some things right. I'm seeing a lot of questions on the chat, Pastor, but I'll let you address those because I don't have my chat off. They just flash, but I'll let you correlate those because obviously you also are managing the time.
Yeah, you've seen those questions, and now you know whether I was your A-level teacher or not. Because but definitely, I wouldn't have taught at Mugabe School. I have my own thoughts on Robert Mugabe, but I love his sense of humor. And,
but in my book, you know what? I must just highlight this, Pastor. You know, in my book, my first book, when I was in Form 6 A-level, he came to our school. And you know, those African mission schools, you sit on the floor because he was the patron of the old boys. And I remember specifically the day he came with like 50 of his guards. There were guards, everything. And he walked past me and I was sitting on the floor in my A-level uniform. And I looked into his eyes, and this is 1995. And I was inspired. You know, you're saying, wow, this is our leader. And now 40 years later, after that, when we were at triple-digit inflation. I remember when I left Zimbabwe to come to South Africa, inflation was 586%. And then I said to myself, how did we move from that situation where I was inspired by this individual to now? And it's a similar story in Africa. You know, Nigeria, you guys have gone through it. You go to Egypt. But then I also realized, and I say that his motives in terms of land redistribution wasn't wrong. And the reality is, whether we accept it or not, the impact geopolitically, globally, has an influence. And we talked about, DRC was the last coup d'etat that happened in DRC that was foiled. But there was suspicion that American CIA was involved. Whether there were wrong elements or not, we'll never know. And also, I can't speak too abruptly about America because I'm on the board for the American Chamber in South Africa. So I need to know where. I don't want to be in trouble after this and calling you pastor for prayers. But I think my point is that at the end of the day, the world is more complicated. I think what's actually happening now globally with Trump with 2.0 is actually good because it's shaking. You know, the removal of US aid and all that development aid has been pulled away. It's forced us as Africans to actually wake up and realize, guys, we have to stand on our own 2 feet. And people like Kagame have been saying that, Abiy Ahmed have been saying that, Ramaphosa. It's now that it takes us as people of this forum to also contribute to that. But anyway, but there are positives even amongst this chaos.
Yeah, and I'm going to yield the floor to my people But I was also saying, looking back now in Zimbabwe, would you people have preferred Joshua Nkomo to have been your president against Robert Mugabe? Is that a debate that's going on now? I mean, I've met Mugabe when I was in school in '79. We all admired him, freedom fighter, Nkomo, Mugabe, blah, 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 free Zimbabwe, free Rhodesia now, this and that, this and that. And when Mugabe came in, maybe he was a bit more suave and stylish than Nkomo. We thought, fantastic, El Dorado. But like you said, 450% inflation a few years after. It's really terrible. It's frightening.
Yeah.
They had great opportunity to really build a great continent. I don't know where we missed it. So go ahead, yeah.
Again, that's why I said I would have really battled in your class to become an A student, Pastor, because you asked the hard questions. But coming back to your point, do you know what? Okay, again, this is my opinion. I think whether it was Nkomo or Strive Masiwa, or I'm just trying because people have always suggested different names, or Muzenda to have taken over, I think Zimbabwe would have still been in the same dilemma. And let me tell you why. And this is my theory. Because if I look at the history of and I'll use the biblical example, Joshua and Moses. Do you know, you know when people say that Moses was the right person to take the people out of Egypt because he was a fighter, he was a revolutionary who had appreciated where potentially he had lived life out of Egypt. So he was the right person to sell the idea of, guys, get out of Egypt. But then he was the wrong person to take them into the promised land because you needed a Joshua, a person who could say, okay, guys, we've been fighting for so long, but we need to settle down now. It talks about different kinds of leadership. Why am I giving you this example? And forgive me in terms of how I use the text, but just bear with me. The challenge with the liberation war is that when we liberate African countries, which we had to do like any liberation war, the wealth was never with us. And whether we like it or not, the custodians of the wealth were the colonialists. And whether we like it or not, they built a culture and a system of looking after that wealth and growing that wealth. A liberation was absolutely necessary and critical to right the wrongs, to bring the wrongs from the right. The problem, though, is that overnight, the skills of ownership of wealth and strategy and the culture, because remember that guy, Stephen Covey, remember he's got that famous saying that culture will eat strategy for breakfast any day. A culture takes time to build. And what you had with Moth liberation is that overnight, you were the guys who were the liberators who took over the wealth and the systems. And I think we underestimated the period of learning to understand and equip in terms of managing that. Yes, they put in, like coalition governments, et cetera. But then I think it was a shock to the system. And remember, I'm talking as a black man, that overnight you've got all this wealth and ownership and responsibility. And we expect these new guys overnight who've come from the bush to be able to handle that. And I think that shock to the system, that underestimation, a lot of African countries have battled. When I look at so I'm not denying the responsibility of accountability and thinking forward, but I think we underestimated the transition period for us to take ownership. So if you go to Zimbabwe right now, we had a great education system. It's now not as great. We had great infrastructure, not as great. You come to South Africa, the same thing. Fortunately, we've been educating a new generation of Africans to be able to take over from there, and the world is changing. But I think if you look at the history of Africa, most of it was changed because of liberation, which was important. Freedom from our oppressors, which was important. But I think we underestimated the transition and the kind of culture that you needed to embed and instill. And because of that, the repercussions are still there. So coming back to your point, if Nkomo had taken over as Mugabe, I think you'd still have the same problem. I think you would have had a person who's taken over and had to deal with the cultural transition of wealth and ownership that takes longer and would have been in the same boat. As much as he was a good man, that is my high-level theory. And it's debatable, but to answer your question, I'm just giving some context to it.
No problem. Let me allow my co-tutors to ask you some questions and let's see how you do in the exam. I have Pastor Sonny Nebi with me, and I'm going to be asking him to lead the Q&A, and also Jumoke Akitelo to back him up.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much. Sonny, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Can you hear me, Doctor? Good afternoon or good evening.
I can hear you. I can see you now. It's good to see you, sir.
Okay. All right. Great. Nice to have you on this platform. I think those that have questions should begin to raise up their hand electronically so that we can queue up the Q&A session. My question, however, is Africa really united enough to present any common front to challenge any external power? I ask this because I listened to Dangote once, you know Dangote, of course, speaking in one African forum and said for him as an African, it was more difficult to get into that country than it was for his counterpart from Belgium or so to get into that country. Today in Africa, we can't even travel freely amongst ourselves, maybe the regional blocks. So the question is, do we actually have a common purpose as Africans that we want to drive in terms of trade? Because if there's no common purpose, coming together will not cut it.
Yeah.
What's your view on this?
So thank you, Pastor. So going back, there's somebody's on it. So going back, so again, this is my theory. Like I said, there's no other continent in the world, and I'm just talking about reality in terms of a geographical space. There is no other piece of land in the world that has got such a concentration of countries and people groups and culture groups that are so diverse in the world. So that's the so in other words, if there's no continent in the world that has got 54 countries, which is 54 heads of state physically. When I say heads of state, people groups physically on one piece of land. So we must understand that. Secondly, the diversity in terms of culture and language, there's no other country, continent, or piece of land in the world that has got that level of diversity and complexity. So why am I highlighting this? The reason I'm highlighting is that you need to appreciate the reality of the diversity and the complexity of the continent. So why is that important? The reason that is important, so sorry, I'll come back to that. You look at America. Why is it easy for America to stand up as a power economically and sustain it? If you think about it, North America, there are two big players there. It's Canada and the US. Then you've got little smaller. You get to South America, yes, you've got a few more countries there. But you go to Asia, it's three big boys. It's Russia, China, and India. And then you've got some smaller countries that plug in there. The one that is a bit more complex is probably Europe. But Europe has been smart because over the years, they've kind of looked externally and colonized, et cetera, et cetera. But coming back to Africa. So there's diversity, there's complexity. So the reality is, and again, let's take off the political hat, let's think strategically. If you're in a very complex environment that Africa has, to get everybody to sing Kumbaya or to become united and everybody to agree to it, it's going to be very difficult. I think it's totally impossible. So the only way you can do that is to say, okay, who are the strong leaders or the guys who can lead the continent and make a decision and bring everybody through? That's why I was saying that's why if you want to get things to happen in Africa and you want to make combined united efforts, you have to get the 4 big or the 5 big boys. Because remember, 50% of Africa's GDP is in 5 countries. And people take this for granted. We have 54 countries, but 50% of our 3 trillion GDP is in 5 countries. So that's South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Algeria, and Egypt, those 5. So if you're going to influence economic power, which translates to political power on the African continent, You have to get those four big boys together. Yes, you add on your Moroccos, your Tunisia. I'm not saying everybody else is important. But what I'm just saying is that's why it talks to economic leadership, which translates to political leadership. So you are right in terms of saying, why do we have the mess that is there? And the people who took advantage of us many years ago realized it was a divide and conquer. I gave the example of DRC. I said King Leopold realized that physically he could not manage the whole of Africa. So he says, I found this sweet spot called Zaire. What I'm going to do is let me make sure that I secure my asset. How do I do that? I'm going to get my friends to come and share a piece of this pie and get them to become little kings there. But at least my asset is secured. And that worked brilliantly, but it was at the cost of the continent. So if you think at the reverse of that, Africa actually has to say, okay, what are the big boys? How can we get them to lead and make an impact? And then let's use this to leverage our negotiations. That's why, for example, AGOA, if Africa is not having a united discussion to say, guys, if you want to deal with us, you must negotiate with Africa combined, then we're back to square one. So that's my short answer. It's not perfect, but I'm just basing it on my reflection. And I hope that helped.
Yeah, thank you very much for that brilliant response. So we're going to go to the people now. The way we do it here is we have a few people that may have a contribution or a question. We'll take the first three, so you can take notes. All
Okay.
right, and after that, then we'll take another set of three, so that we can group them and get through with it quickly. So the first person will be Otaje Faye.
Can I just ask that people put on their cameras? I feel a bit lonely if I'm the only one on my.
No, it's okay. Your camera will be what will appear on the YouTube stuff. So just leave yourself on. You are the main speaker.
So need to put on camera and let Jumoke put on her camera also so that we can see both of them.
Yeah, no, I'm saying when they ask questions, if I can at least just see their camera, them on, so at least I know I'm speaking to a human being and not a chatbot. You never know these days.
Sure, you are speaking to a human being. I am
Nigerian people.
Can you see me now?
You can't see.
I'm there now. I hope you can see me. All right, so I'll take on Faye Otaji first. Faye, and then after that, Pastor Funke Awolowo, and then you see Ransom Kuti. So Faye, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, sir.
Your face, Faye. If your face is showable, knowing that you're in your house, who knows what you are doing there?
Can you see me, please?
Faye, you see, I don't trust you, Faye.
Hold on. Can you see me now?
I can see you now.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I want to ask a question.
Just go ahead with your question. Maybe you can.
You mentioned about having a combined bloc when negotiating for trade with the likes of China and the US. And my question is, why is then the African Union put in place? What is the role of the African Union? Isn't that something the African Union should be fronting for the continent of Africa? The big boys you mentioned, are they not part of the African Union? And why is the African Union not taking its role? Is because I believe this is something that the African Union can put forward as one of their policies, that for you to get any raw materials from Africa, you have to do it in a way that favors us. So what is the role of the African Union in all of this? Thank you.
Okay, I've got the first question, the role of the African Union in terms of its role in negotiating. I've got that one. And the second one.
Good evening.
Good evening,
My
Pastor
name is, good evening, Doctor. Thank you so much for all that you have contributed. I want to just add and ask. I went to school somewhere in England and was privy to having Asians, Africans, and all that all in one school. And I noticed what I observed. First of all, the Chinese people were not friends with the Japanese people. And but I saw that those two groups, the Japanese and the Chinese, were driven by excellence. Apart from us, there were Nigerians. I think there was one Zimbabwean girl. And, but these two groups, everything from ballet to gymnastics to hockey to swimming, they were tops. I don't know how they did it. And then when it came to English language, when they first came, they stumbled a bit. But after some time, they topped the class. And I saw that they knew they were not there to play. I saw also, apart from parenting, because I think Susan Choi, one of them, asked me, how come you Nigerians know so much? And I did tell her. But she didn't tell me much. She just said they knew that they just had to be tops at everything that they did. And what I fast forward now, half of us, that's the Nigerians, stayed in England till I think I came back about 15 years ago or 20 years ago. But most of the Japanese went back. They came to learn and they took it back, right back to where they were. And that sort of explains what we're getting today. We, the Africans, of course, we did not, especially, I think there was a Ghanaian girl who did not speak to us and who had, I think once I engaged her and she told me, the story of Ghana must go and all that. And it explains why the white people were able to penetrate, divide us, and where we're at loggerheads. Because yes, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah tried to make the Africans unite, but it's like what divides us is more crucial than what brings us together. And I'm wondering how we can actually come to the table and get these things done. Then you spoke a lot about Trump. Yeah, you said he's a nationalist. I see Trump as somebody who is, first of all, a patriotic person. What he's doing and what he's even doing to Europe is telling Europe, we are not going to help you anymore. You've got to prove yourself, because what they did, I would say, was in the similitude of a gang up against the weaker nations. But he's telling them, now you're on your own and all that. Yes, it's capitalist in a way, but I see somebody that, because most of his followership are people in the grassroots. And so that's not a fully, compliant national, capitalist, so to speak. And I think one of the things we need to really get back to is how to be patriotic. In the first place, we sold ourselves to them, and they're still taking, advantage of that mindset. And that's why we are selling things to them at cheaper rates and at our own detriment. What can we do to change that mindset? We learned about, the emperor's period signal of Germany, and we learned about Mansa Musa. We saw what they did and how they took it to them. They went to them to trade with them on their own at par. But what we are seeing now is that we're almost at their mercy. We don't have diplomatic relations or diplomatic integrity to sell what we've got. How can we do that? How can we revert to that place of earning our respect and trading to our full, to get the fullness out of what we are trading with in terms of raw materials? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so getting to excellence and trade, operating at our optimal. How can we get back? Have I got it, Pastor Funga? I've just summarized. Okay, she's on mute, but
all
okay,
right. Thank you very much. I think we'll take one more before Professor Nick Grinch can unmute and ask a question.
I think
Well,
you want.
you've skipped Madam Yemisi Ransom Kuti.
Oh, okay, sorry. Madam Yemisi Ransom Kuti, then you. I think we can take the two so that you can just go on. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, I'll put on my video.
Welcome.
Okay, are you seeing my face?
we can see you, Madam Oga.
Yes, you are feeling lonely, so I have put my video on for you.
Thank you, my sister. Thank you.
Yeah, my quick question is to have that strength that you were talking about as African countries. we need to have stable democracies, I think. And one of the challenges we're having in Nigeria at the moment is the issue of one-party state. A lot of political gladiators are defecting to one party, and the average Nigerian is worried that having a one-party state will undermine democracy itself. You mentioned a few countries that you say are doing well that appear to be running a one-party state. The democracy in Rwanda that is strong and thriving is not quite the standard democracy. So I want your views about how we should be thinking differently about having these strong democracies that will be able to come together to tackle the West. Should we just toe the models that the West has given to us and fight each other to death unless we have that, or can we be more flexible about a Singaporean type democracy, a Rwandan type democracy, an Egyptian type democracy? Your thoughts on that? Thank you so much, Doctor, for your very insightful presentation. My name is Ms. Yemisi Ransom-Kuti. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation.
Thank you, Madam. Chairman, so I'll respond to the three. There's a lot of interrelation, but let me start with with Africa Union, whilst it's there. There's I think it's the guy who developed the theory MC squared, Albert Einstein. And I'm answering the question of, in terms of how do we fix things, the African Union. And I think there's a saying that he has that says that sometimes the steps that have caused the problems are not necessarily the same steps you should follow to fix the problems. I'll just repeat that. The steps that have caused the problems are not necessarily the same steps that you should use to fix the problems. And if you apply that to different aspects of life, you can apply. The reason I'm saying that is that where we are now, Africa, with the problems that are there, with what caused us to get here, if you look at the solutions, I actually believe that some of the solutions actually have to be innovative. Yes, you still have to have leadership, but they are not impossible. And one of the solutions I look at, and this ties Yemisi in terms of what you've highlighted, is that there's also that debate in the most recent thought leadership with regards to politics. Is democracy, in the way we understand it, theoretically applicable to Africa? And I use this because I do a lot of leadership development classes in business schools. And I said, if you look at the leading economies in the world, you look at, America as a typical example, you look at China. China is not a democracy. Economically, it's pumping. Whether we like it or not, yes, they've got hiccups, but it's not a democracy. You go to the Middle East, you look at your Saudis, you look at your Dubais, those are pumping economies, but they're not democracies. And when I say democracies, in the way we theoretically understand democracy. And then you say to yourself, but they've got a cultural, in Saudi, it's a monarchy. In China, I don't know what you call it, it's a combination of communism, capitalism, etc., but it's working for them. Then you say and then you see how that leadership structure is embedded in their culture. In America, as much as they have hiccups, it was working for them. How sustainable is the current model? That's out to the jury. So what am I coming to? I think Africa is an opportunity to look and say, guys, what is it that will work for us based in terms of where we are now and what we have to do? And that's a very provocative question because it challenges the status quo, because whatever that model is, and if it works out, it might work in South Africa differently to Nigeria, to Kenya. So I think there's a lot of self-reflection there in terms of, because we look at Rwanda right now, and whether we like it or not, something is working. The question is, when Kagame goes, will it work? So coming back to your point, I think we have to give Africa that freedom to actually, and the danger as well, Yemisi, I go back to that whole in terms of saying Africa is not one country. It's 54 countries with 54 people groups. there's a lot of complexity. And sometimes the danger, we try and look for one solution. I understand Muammar Gaddafi's vision of having the USA, because that's what he wanted, the United States of Africa. It's actually ironic in this day and age, that's what he wanted. He wanted the USA. But then you say to yourself, sometimes the power of Africa is in its diversity, not in terms of homogenizing it. The danger we're trying to do is to try and heterogeneity. Sorry, you know, English came from a foreign country, so sometimes when we try and replicate it, we lose it. But I think, come again?
I said I can relate. Please go ahead. We can understand.
But the danger, and I always highlight this, is when I talk to international investors, to multinationals, I said, the danger you make in Africa is you try and heterogenize, in terms of you try and homogenize, that's the word I'm looking for. You try and homogenize Africa to say, okay, let's have a framework that blends everything from Cape to Cairo. But if you're Yoruba and I'm Shona, our diversity is actually our strength. Yes, when we come together, we create something unique. So I think what I'm trying to say, sometimes we try and provide, whether we like it or not, we are forced to be on one land. But sometimes we miss the uniqueness and the innovativeness that comes out of our diversity by trying to homogenize. And if you think about it, to a certain extent, the reason there was colonial overpower in Africa was that we were colonialized by three typical cultures: Portuguese, French, and English. If you think about it, there are three countries in Africa that are Portuguese: Angola, Mozambique, Cabo Verde. There might be one or two I left over, but basically those are the three big ones. But then each of those countries culturally are so unique in their own ways. Then you've got your English and your Francophone. So I think what I'm trying to do, and I don't have the perfect answer, is that sometimes we try and homogenize into a solution as opposed to saying, okay, guys, we are different, but we share the same piece of land. We share the same piece of endowments and assets. How can we unite that to create a solution? So that's on the political, and to a certain extent, South Africa is trying to do that. They are finding it the hard way, but they're trying to do that. So from a democracy perspective, I think I'll land on this to say that we need to be able to have the caliber, and to a certain extent, the blessing that Trump has given us by taking away aid, because aid comes with a handhold over your country. By taking away aid, he's actually allowed us to say, okay, we are no longer at your mercy with regards to aid. We actually have to stand up on our own 2 feet and wear our big boy pants. What does it mean now? And that should give us enough room to say, okay, guys, without the mental of aid, what can we do for ourselves? So I think that's going to bring a different era. Give it time in terms of how people think and lead on the African continent. Going back to the Africa Union, what's the purpose of the Africa Union? What was the origin of the Africa Union? Organization of African Unity. The initial drive was to say, guys, we've come through this liberation era. We need to be united. I think it was the right decision. I think where we are going now is to say, guys, brothers, we are united. We've got a scary past and a complicated past. What is it that we need to do to take the continent forward in terms of health, et cetera, et cetera? Again, I go back to that whole principle of you need to have the leaders. You know, Yemisi, if you go to a meeting and there are 10 people in the room and 5 of them are the wealthy. Okay, if you go to a meeting and there's Dangote, there's Tony Elemelu, I'm just using Nigerian examples, and who's another big old guy in Nigeria? I've said Tony, Dangote, let's say a third one. And you know, these are the wealthiest people in the room. And then I'm sorry to use the extreme example, and then there are 2 other people who are very poor. By default, the people who can actually make an impact are the wealthy people, if they do it responsibly. What I'm just trying to say is that if we give the guys who've got the economic clout and capability and wealth in the right leadership sense, and I'm not saying don't undermine the Eswatinis, undermine the Zimbabweans, but I'm just saying that if the guys who've got the wealth show the right leadership responsibilities and work together to influence the others, then part of me believes that will lead to the right direction be taken. That's just me. I'm not saying only money counts, but I'm just saying if we're going to get out of the doldrums, we're going to need economic and political clout. And then the last lady talked about excellence. And I like that one because let me tell you, a funny thing, madam, and I've forgotten the ladies, Pastor Uncle. Do you know when I did O-level Cambridge and A-level Cambridge, the most, and this is Zimbabwe, and for me, this is the biggest highlight of my life. The English books that we used to read that used to make our English good were the series of books called Pace Setters. I don't know if you remember them. There were those English novels that Nigerian authors wrote. And I remember I was at a mission school in the rural areas, but our English, I mean, I got an A for A-level English. So Pastor Itau, you must just remember that for O-level English, I got an A. But a big contribution was I read English books authored by Nigerian authors. And I was a Zimbabwean. The books I battled to read were the King James versions of Romeo and Juliet. I never understood why we're going through that. But the pace setters, things fall apart. A person has said it. I've forgotten the author. Please tell me the author's name. I can't forget him now. Can somebody shout it out? Who was the things fall apart? The author. Yes, Sole Woyinka, in terms of the Lion and the Jewel. Man, those are the Chinua Achebe, that's what it is. Sole Woyinka, the Lion and the Jewel. Those were the English that got me across the line. So when people hear you now talking at London Business School, or when I speak on international forums, say, where'd you get your English from? Man, it was Nigerian authors that shaped me. So I think what I'm trying to say, madam, is there an issue and challenge of excellence in the African continent? Yes. Can we do better? Yes. But I think we underestimate what we've done in the past and what we've done in terms of currently. That we've got people who are changing things on the continent, who've got a sense of investments, who are doing the right things. Do we need more of them? Yes. But I think sometimes we throw out the baby with the bathwater. So from an excellence perspective, can more be done? Yes. But let's not take for granted that already a lot has happened. It's just that we need to amplify this. And sometimes in the chaos of the bigger world, we lose on this. So I hope, as I say, guys, I don't have the solutions for everything, but I think we underestimate the value that we have with regards to the positives on the continent, because that will stimulate us going forward. Back to you, sir. I've tried to summarize as much as possible. Mr. Facilitator?
Professor Grange, please go ahead, ma. Good evening, ma. Good evening, sir. Professor Grange, please go ahead. We've asked you to unmute.
I think he's trying to mute and he's unmuted. Nike, it's Professor Nike Grange.
That's right. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm a Niger boy now.
Well, I can show you my face briefly, so that you know that I'm not a spring chicken that is looking at.
Beauty, my sister, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So in your heart, if you be loyal, you're a spring chicken. So shall it be. So shall it be.
Voila. Oh, thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. Let me just take off from where you just left off. The fact that a lot of the knowledge and skills that we have within the country is not being made use of by our leaders. And I think it comes from the arrogance of power. They have this power to be able to look at everybody and see whether they're in their party or not. It's they determine recruitment of professionals based on partisanship. That is not going to give us the best leadership. So how can that be changed? Somebody like you, Dr. Rutendo, should be an advisor, should be the advisor in economics in your country. But you find that they might not want you there. because of your, the fact that you don't belong to a particular party. That happens a lot in Africa. And certainly in Nigeria it does. My second comment and question is this. What about BRICS? What is BRICS about? When you have included also neo-colonialists among you, who are ready to exploit further, So can you just explain to us how, BRICS can help us to reshape the economy in Africa, and put us, on the global stage from the right perspective? Thank you.
Madam Oga, thank you very much. And let me start off with the BRICS one, because I had a discussion recently at the platform around BRICS. And look, for me, you have to belong somewhere. And the advantage of BRICS is that whether we like it or not, globally, when it comes to economic power, the monopoly has been in the G3, G7. The only time African countries start getting into it is when you start getting G20. That's the sad reality. It's not a pleasant, but it's a sad reality. BRICS, for me, why I like it, whether it's South Africa in there or Nigeria is in there, is that you've got two big powers in there. You've got India, Russia, and China. Unfortunately, Russia is at war, and that's not great. So, but let's assume they were not at war and BRICS was it is. I think you need to create a competitive world, because remember, the danger of communism and socialism, it defies competitiveness. Once you have competitiveness, it enforces quality, because now somebody's trying to do the other. So in a world that is monopolized historically by the G3, by the G4, G5, G7, it brings an element of competitiveness. That's why, and they're not silly. One of the reasons why the West is so anti-BRICS having its own currency is because what it will mean is that it will compete with the US. And when you have a monopoly, you try and lock out everybody else. So that's a good thing about it. But it has to also have economic translation and fairness. So I hear you with regards to, you've got your China in there, but we let China be China in Africa. The same China that builds underrated bridges in Africa is the same China that is building the iPhone that is selling for $3,000 or whatever in the US. So it really boils down, as much as we point fingers at China, we point to ourselves. Because if America is importing on average $400 billion per annum from China, and they're not complaining about quality, why is it in Africa we can bring things from China? So there's an element of leadership and quality that is also our responsibility. With regards, so coming back to BRIC, I think BRIC can work to our advantage. Bear in mind, I think as a capitalist, and I think sometimes you have to say, okay, how can I make this work for me? In conjunction with the diversity and the complexity we have in Africa. And I think it's impossible. I think it's possible, but again, it takes leadership, it takes forethought. Coming back to skills, one of the stats I shared, I don't know if you saw that, madam, I showed you that globally by 2030, there's going to be a global shortage of skill that is going to equate to 85 million people, which will translate to 8.5 trillion revenue. So right now, I've got 3 boys that are in, one is university, 2 are in high school. My responsibility as a father to them is saying, I'm skilling you not to be an African skilled person to look for jobs in Africa. I'm skilling you so that if there is a skill that is needed, any part of the world, you can be a person who can provide that skill in whatever it specializes. Because sometimes the danger is that, a person in China is being skilled to lay a brick, not in China, but he's been skilled to say that at any time you go in the world, you're able to lay a brick. So I think what I'm just trying to highlight is also that mentality. That's why I was showing you the offshoring capability of Africa, whereby we've brought in $2.5 billion of revenue onto the African continent using African resources in Africa without having to export them, because companies are beginning to see the leverage capacity. Yes, we can say, how can we make our revenue increase? But there's also a mindset. And again, it goes back, yes, to leadership, to mindsets. It's not that easy, but I believe there are leaders on the African continent that are beginning to have that mindset. And I believe with time, there'll be a critical mass. And a big player on that is Nigeria. Another statistic I'm just going to tell you, diaspora money coming into Africa for last year exceeded the $100 billion mark. These are Africans in the diaspora sending money home. That $100 billion was more than development aid assistance. That includes the US aid, which was about $50 billion, and FDI, foreign direct investment receipts. So Africans are now sending home more money combined than US aid and FDI. And the only difference is that that money is going in an unstructured manner. But imagine if it was able to be funneled into one area and coordinated through Afreximbank, FDIB, the powerhouse of African money coming into Africa from Africans, and the impact we make. It's a different discussion altogether. So, madam, that's how I would just summarize it, based on my perception. Back to you, facilitator.
All right. Thank you very much for that brilliant response. I think we are coming to the bottom of the hour where we'll begin to wrap up now. And I would ask Pastor to come back if he's on, so that you can take your final shot, and maybe Dr. Rutendo can give us his closing remarks as well. So we'll wrap up at the bottom of the hour. Pastor, are you there?
I'm here.
Over to you, sir.
Okay, before I wrap up, I'd like to invite Jumoke, please, to take a few of the questions that are on the chat, in the chats, and that have been put on the screen. So Jumoke, please, can you quickly go into the relevant area, the chat and whatever, and throw out some of those questions, especially those that have not been spoken to yet.
So we have, good evening, sir. We have 3 questions in the chat. And the first one, can the leaders come together to do this instead of being self-conceited and allowing themselves to be fooled by the foreign leaders who will not let Africa unite? So this is in reference to African leaders coming together to plan the economic prosperity for the continent. So that's question number 1. Do you want me to read the other questions?
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
take them together. Okay.
What
are the positives currently, plus as reflected in enhancing the lives of the African people? So I take that to mean, what are the positives about coming together as a continent that would enhance the lives of the African people? The last question, what does Africa Tribe Advisory stand for? And what achievements or efforts have they done to reintegrate Africa integrate Africa's ravaged economies and adulterated social cultures that the West have encouraged and programmed for destruction with imposition and support of corrupt leaders?
Oh, you've got a very... So do you want me to answer those quickly?
Yes, those are the 3 questions. Thank you.
Okay. So let me start with the easy one. This is a very difficult class. You guys give me hard questions. Tribe Africa Advisory, in terms of what have we done? Tribe Advisory, my background is, I used to work for 2 big multinationals, Deloitte and Sage. And about 3 years ago, I went independent. So it's a boutique advisory firm. And not to try and run away from responsibility, as small as we are, what is my responsibility? My passion is to work with leadership, in both African leadership and multinational exec leadership, in terms of giving the right mindset in terms of how to do business in Africa. And I do that based on the framework, part of the passion I've shared with you. But I say to people, I'm an African realist. In other words, I see opportunity in Africa, but I'm also realistic with the challenges that are there. And we cannot say to ourselves, there's great opportunity without addressing the realities of health, the realities of energy, etc., etc. So I'm a teacher, but I also facilitate investments with that same mindset. So that's what Tribe Africa does in its small way. working with key partners. Coming to the positives, I've given examples. I've talked about, I always say, for example, when you look at about technology, when you look at Nigeria from an energy perspective, when you have industrialists like Dangote who've said, let us build a refinery but run by Nigerians in Nigeria to help supply Africa. That's a big thing. When you look at Strive Masiwa, a businessman, but it doesn't have to be the wealthy people. When you look at a nurse who earns a few dollars, but is able to go and treat and sacrifice and make decisions to help a COVID patient. And so it doesn't just have to be the wealthy, it's just having individuals making the right decisions. And the reality, guys, is that Africa, we don't amplify our success stories as much as other worlds. The same challenges of corruption are happening in other worlds. It's just that ours are amplified for us more than other regions. And that's the sad reality of life. There's that African proverbs, until the tale of the hunt or the story of the hunt is told by the lion, the actual story will always be biased towards the hunter who was actually hunting. But the lion himself can also tell and say, guys, this is the true story. So I think there are a lot of positive stories and individuals make a difference in terms of the whole of the collective. And then leaders. Yes, we don't have perfect leaders, but I don't believe that we're on ground zero with leaders. I believe Africa has got a representation of some leaders, or even Nigeria. You guys have gone through your stuff, but you've got, I remember I used to do things with the African Bank, with things we wanted to do with Obasanjo Leadership Academy, great stories that were there. Zimbabwe, yes, we've got our downside, but there are great stories of other people who've done great things there. I think that it just takes us as individuals here working together to achieve that. But again, bear in mind that, and I don't have the answer for this, but I truly believe the solution for Africa, you cannot use the same blueprint that you can use in America. Our diversity, our complexity is much bigger, but that's our strength. It's not a weakness. When you try and homogenize Africa, you lose the opportunity to change it. Is realize the heterogeneity of Africa is actually, that's where the diversity of solution comes from. It's just then how do we get that together? And I don't have the answer, but I truly believe by trying to homogenize Africa, you miss the plot. United, yes, we have to be, but we mustn't lose our diversity, because out of that uniqueness, that's where our solutions will come from. That's how I would summarize it. Back to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you so much for all that you have done and for passing our exams, Dr. Rutendo.
Thank you, teacher. You're a good Jagaban.
I'm a good gentleman, I'm a good teacher. And for that hearty laugh that you gave us, extra point, that laugh gives you an A+.
That laugh used to get me kicked out of class. The teacher said, you can't laugh like that when you're in my class.
And now that you confess that Nigerian jollof rice is the best in the world.
I was going to ask a question, but it might land me in hospital. But that which is better rice, Ghana jollof or Nigerian jollof? So maybe one day you can teach me.
I will teach you Nigerian jollof. Ghana jollof is no good. Don't worry about that. Ghana has better things. I won't tell you what.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
You can imagine what they are, but definitely not jollof. Thank you so much. It's very good, very fresh. While I'm here in SA, if it's possible that we catch up, we will. Otherwise, we'll definitely find another time and all that. It's very refreshing. Your insights into Africa, very, very, very superb. And also your optimism, your quiet optimism in spite of what we are going through. We're working very hard at the ALG to inspire great leadership in Nigeria and in Africa, and to ensure that we can have our leaders in the right place doing the right thing, so that we can have the right kind of Africa, and so on and so forth. And also to inspire the followership too, because quite a lot of Africans are a little bit ignorant here and there, and they don't even know what to do. And that's part of what we're trying to do on this platform. I'm sure we're going to have you again. We'll let you know. And in the meantime, if there are ways by which we can work together and cooperate to build a better Africa, we will do so. Thank you so much again for coming. Our regards to your wife and to the 3 boys, who I'm sure have a laugh than you do. God bless you.
May God bless you too. Thank you very much. God bless everybody. Have a great day.
Have a good day. Okay, Jumoke, please take the announcements and let's sign off.
All right. I'll see everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us again this evening. We meet here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Same Zoom link, different speaker. And we have the CRC course coming up. There's a registration link that we'll probably be sending out. So the CRC course is the Citizens Responsibility course that takes you through about 6 sessions of how to engage to promote good governance, and we call it participatory governance. So as a citizen, Mr. President just talked about the followership. So this course will give you more information on how you can be well informed and engaged in really promoting good governance and the progress and advancement of Nigeria. So thank you again. See you next week, 5 p.m., same Zoom link. God bless you. Everyone is unmuted now.
Goodbye.
And continue to exchange our pleasantry. The after party.
Yeah, continue.
Now we can start the after party.
The after party should be the action.
The after party of the after party.
Yeah.
Equal, let's talk privately. Yeah? Action.
Good to see you, Jumoke.
And see you too.
Did you hear me?
I'm working on that document. I'll have it to you today.
Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, Auntie.
Thank you, everybody.
Pastor, good evening, sir.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, ma.
Good evening.
Oh, good evening.
Good
Madam,
evening,
my
everybody.
namesake.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mama Simple, good evening, ma.
Good evening. That was a very interesting discussion. We thank God. I think we need to act. It's just not talk. We need to act.
Absolutely.
We need to act.
So there's a link in the chat room for you to send us your contact information so that we can engage you with more information. So we have those very interesting conversations every week here. But like you said, we do need to act. It's time to act.
I remember we said the same thing about 2 years ago or last year. We said the same thing.
We are acting.
One of the ways we are acting in the diaspora is to launch a diaspora committee or group on Saturday. Yes, it's called the Nigeria Diaspora Committee for Change. And, we hope that we'll be able to bring to the fore some of these issues about what diaspora is contributing to development in Nigeria and how it can do more. And particularly, it needs to be recognized as a political force. So that's what we are going to do at our launching on Saturday. Now we'll send
Is a diaspora political party?
It's not a party, no. It's a no. It's
a pressure group.
That's right.
A pressure group. Yes.
I know. I remember that group. I'm giving my mom a little bit.
Yeah, Jumoke is part of us now. Don't mind her.
The email.
I'm her troublesome daughter, so I have to act my part.
Hello.
One of us. So just want to take advantage of all the opportunities that have been left untouched, so that we can help to change Nigeria positively. Thank you very much. I shall send round the Zoom link?
Yeah. Post it on all the ALG groups.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Moke,
All right.
for your help.
Hello,
Lara,
ma'am.
how are you?
Can I suggest?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Can I suggest that we design, deliberately a strategy for taking action, as a team, and then see what because there's a lot that is coming forth from all of these things that are coming up here, and we'll have a lot of things falling through the cracks if we don't design, a definite action plan, that we can use to give effect to some of these
Okay.
things that are being said here. So I would suggest that we'll sit down and really do that, not for diaspora to do theirs, for people here, individually to begin to do that. We can corporately deal with this issue and have a very ambitious plan, definite plan to take action with respect to all of these things that we're hearing every Thursday here. So that's just my suggestion.
Thank you. We
That's
appreciate
one
that.
way.
Have you signed up, sir?
Sorry.
Mr. Okungbawa, do we have your contact information so we can follow up with you and kind of share some of the initiatives that we're working on and then plug into that?
I was going to say, Mr. Okungbawa, that's one way of doing it. Another way, of course, is to coordinate all that is being done separately. So you don't have to wait until initiatives are taken at the central level. They can be taken peripherally, but they can now be coordinated. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's part of what he's also saying, that there should be a kind of concerted effort for us to move together as a unit. And that's one of the things that we've been promoting, right? That's why we have that coalition for participatory governance. There's a need for us to really not to break the silos, because it's not, though different organizations are doing different things, but I think coming together to solidify those plans will get us much farther. Mr. Okungbawa, do we have your contact information, sir? I don't know if he's still on.
Most of some of you never see this video. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Do we have your contact information?
I'm trying to put it out there in the chat room. Would that be okay?
Yes, put it. I'll get it from there. But there's also a form that I put in the chat room. There's a link that gives us your contact information so that we can keep you posted. You can send that or just put it and then I'll grab it from the chat room.
Okay, I'll do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
The easy method to do your pancakes: crack your egg into a container, pour your flour and pour your milk into it.
Antibola, Ms. Adetula, we are coming to eat cake.
Exactly. And see the perfect result.
Antibola, do you have enough cake for all of us?
Well, that is going to be in November.
Okay, we are coming, because we hear that you are baking in the background.
Okay, ma'am. I've put it out there in the chat room.
Yes, I have it, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And you're from the great state of Edo.
Yes, I am, by the grace of God.
Okay.
Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you. This is quite Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Greetings to our pastor.
I think he's still on.
God bless you, sir. God bless you. God be with you.
Pastor Lu, I think our after party has ended.
Yes,
okay, Pastor Lu, thank you. Thank you very much.
We are not partying very hard today.
By the time we start revenue driving,
we're processing what the doctor suggested.
Okay.
At the end of the Saturday, we'll go down. Pray that everybody will go down.
This Saturday, Abby?
Yes.
Anyala.
Thank you, everybody.
Kind of
Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. God bless.
Bye.
Somebody said Trump was doing a good job. Can I just register my dissenting voice?
We are very worried about it. So these days, everything,
throwing a bomb into a
everybody's
system.
getting their house in order because
the man is unhinged. And we don't know what's coming
it's
next.
really unfortunate though, because he has, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's him. It's the system or the people that are supporting this have rolled back democracy in this country to probably the 18th century. I mean, the 1800s. I'm serious.
Yes, but the question is why? Why do they want to roll it back? It's for their own selfish interest.
It's the advancement of the people, the BIPOC population that has kind of frightened other brothers here, and I don't know that there is legitimate reasoning for that. Even U.S. citizen, I have a friend's niece that was born here. They won't renew her passport. It's scary. Born in America.
Yeah.
She's of age and she went to renew her American passport, Nigerian. So it's not it's close to home. They didn't renew her passport.
Most of the things they say
are not.
But that's wrong, though. Did she do anything wrong?
No,
Sorry, I didn't
no,
get
she did
that.
not do
Sorry.
anything wrong.
Is that Sister Jumoke speaking?
Yes, it is. It's Sister Jumoke speaking. Yes.
What happened? Why would they? I don't understand. I'm confused.
Because they said they did not deny it and say, well, we deny it. They just said it's under administrative review. And usually when something is under administrative review, just go and sit back and wait for God knows how long.
So did she do it in Nigeria?
No, she did it here in the US.
How old is she?
She's 18, going on 19.
So what is the agenda? You were trying to explain what the agenda is.
The agenda is to keep us in our place and to make sure
Agenda
that
25. Everybody should go and read
2025, yes.
Project 2025. They want to make America white again. Even if it's poorer, they don't care about that as much as making it white
as
again.
white, yes, you're right. But
you know, they'll throw all the bombs.
It's too far gone to have it white now. It's too far gone.
You'll find it difficult, but they're going to give it their damnness in the next 4 years.
But the amount of damage that would have been done by then,
even to the economy.
Don't care.
It's doing a lot of damage to the economy.
They don't care. The main objective.
I don't know about they don't care. They will soon be made to care by their competitors on the world stage.
Those people who are running the agenda are totally comfortable. Nothing is going to affect them. They know that America can survive a lot of storms. It will not come under. It will not sort of implode. They have a massive reserve and all of that. The rich ones will survive. And those are the ones they are interested in. The rich ones, the big Bezos and the industrialists and all of that. And the rest of the citizens will just have to manage themselves. They will shout and scream and protest, but in 4 years, they will retire and go and enjoy their wealth, but America will be whiter than they left it. That's the purpose.
A lot of people now are self-deporting. I know a couple of Nigerians that, you know, they pack their things and they're heading home. It's because I think it's being caught unawares that is the most dangerous part. So now everyone has, has their antenna on. Even what I even advise citizens to do is give your children power of attorney, no matter how many years you've been in this country. Make sure the kids can sell your house if they need to, operate your account if they need to. Because there's there's a Nigerian that he's a citizen as well, but I think they said he lied on his green card application or something like that. So because of that, they said he wasn't supposed to have had his citizenship because his green card was a fraud. And so he's in detention, a US citizen.
Wow.
These are real.
Wow.
These are not stories.
Not stories.
They are not stories. So,
Well,
is he a big person in,
to all
is he
those that
earning a
said,
lot of
oh,
money?
he doesn't have, because he's anti-LGBT or whatever it is that
he's the
people
biggest
are
fraud
hanging on
in
to.
town. He's the
Yes.
biggest crook around.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Exactly.
those who still think what he's doing is for and in the interest of America,
He's
it's in
acting
the
for Christ.
nature of some Americans, not America as we know it, that is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, diverse community. He scrapped all your DEIs and all of that as far as they are concerned. This oligarch that is controlling America now, that some of them are in the shadows, some of them have come out. He's made one of them a top position in his cabinet. I can't remember his name, but they're the ones managing America now. And a lot of systemic shocks. This tariff thing is a small thing. If you watch, is it David Wolf? And he's a historian. You just say you guys are just seeing the tip of the iceberg. By the time they start launching some of the other programs, defunding education, defunding the health sector, all the Medicaid, blah blah blah, people will realize that it's a totally different ball game, and they only have 4 years to do it, so they're just going to be rolling it out.
God is bigger than them.
Don't drive me from my country.
You are coming. Jumoke is coming home. So I'm
Stop
not
it. They didn't drive me. I remember I said, well, they did not drive me.
Jumoke was thinking of coming home anyway.
But I think there should be. I'm glad the Africans or Nigerians in diaspora are doing something. There should be a very, very strong effort to coordinate the Africans because that's why the Jews have a hold on the American system. They're so
I can tell you
organized.
stories about us and that effort. It's very fortunate. I don't know if there's something in our DNA that is so self-serving that we don't put communal good ahead of our own selfish interest. The American Jewish Committee back in 2004, I believe, came up with ideas to train us to build strong advocacy as actually Nigerians. They had a very strong interest in Nigeria because I think their CEO at that time had lived in Nigeria and had some business interest in Nigeria. This was during the Obasanjo regime. They planned so many training sessions for us to be like their protege in terms of advocating for policies that impact positively impact Nigeria. They took us to Washington, met some. Do you know that it was amongst us that they still went behind to go and be promoting personal agenda? So imagine how that made some of us look. And you will get a call, and you will get a call from one of them to say, do you know so and so person? They've just called, they've asked for a meeting with this other group. And yet we were presenting as a diaspora group. And then they will go solicit meetings for their own interests, whether it's for their
business or whatever,
groups or their associations and things like that. This was what was going on, and that's how that failed. For 2 years, we were working. They gave us a lot of blue